All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the work session for the City Council for the City of Wildwood for Monday, February 8, 2021. Ms. Eldridge, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Boland.
Here.
Councilmember Garitano.
Here.
Councilmember Flasher.
Here.
Councilmember Jaxie.
Here.
Councilmember Bertolino.
Here.
We're starting the meeting. All right.
Councilmember Dodwell.
Here.
Well, this is great because I can hear yours. But I don't hear
Councilmember Nyan.
Here.
Councilmember Bartoni.
Here.
Councilmember Bros.
Here.
Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Edens.
Here.
Councilmember Remy. Councilmember Farmer. Councilmember Galani.
Here.
Councilmember McCune. Councilmember McCune. Councilmember Rambo.
Here.
I'm
Councilmember
here.
Hutchin.
Who was the last one?
Councilmember McCutcheon.
Here.
And I didn't hear Councilmember McCune. I see her, but I didn't hear her. Okay. All right.
Can you hear me now?
So welcome again, and council members.
I'm here as
I
well.
want to mention, as you know, we've got some weather going on, and just as I was walking into City Hall, there was some freezing rain. We've got city team members that are here that need to be home sooner rather than later this evening, and if we have residents, the same would certainly apply to them. So just at the outset, I would ask you, as we have a full agenda this evening, and as we move forward through the work session, as well as the main meeting, if you could just please be mindful of that. If other people have made your comment that you were going to make, please consider whether to make it again, for example. Doesn't mean you shouldn't say what you want to say, obviously, but I'm just asking that you please keep in mind the weather and the situation relative to people who are physically at City Hall in particular, that will need to be going home in some conditions that are not particularly favorable. And I appreciate you doing that in advance, and thank you for that. Moving on to, before we get to action items under information, we have 14 items by my count. Is there anything under information of these 14 items that any member of the council like to discuss, or about which you might have a question before we go into our 3 action items? Councilmember McCutcheon.
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions. I was reading the material for this evening, and somewhere I read that J and left turns are interim solutions. And is that the case? And if so, what's the long-term cost going to be?
Mayor Boland, I'd be glad to address that. Ms. McCutcheon, the J turns and the left turn lanes are indeed the ultimate solution or the recommended improvements on Route 100. That's the results of a study that was completed last year by an engineer for MoDOT. So those are the projects that are included tonight under the resolutions that would recommend the submittal of federal funding applications for those 2 projects, but those are the ultimate improvements.
Okay, I must have misunderstood what I read. And then my other 2 questions is, one, what will the cost be to updating the economic development guide? And what will the cost be to do a tourism campaign?
I could respond if that's all right, Mayor.
Sure, go ahead, Julian. Thank you.
Councilmember McCutcheon, both of those items are being completed in-house, so there's no outside cost.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, we like that. Thank you, Councilmember McCutcheon. Any other questions or comments on anything under information before we go to action? Councilmember Bros?
Yeah, Joe, earlier I emailed on any further update with the Homestead Shiloh.
With the mayor's
Just-
permission, Councilmember Brost, I did receive an email from Chris Bay, the owner of Bay's ET, and he noted that there's been no progress with Ameren, Missouri. If I knew who he is dealing with, I'd be more than glad to call down to Ameren, Missouri and just see if I can do anything to assist. As you know, the permit per se has been approved by Ameren, Missouri for the aerial installation on their poles. But I guess they have to do some pre-work on the poles to accommodate Bay's ET, and that seems to be what's slowing things down. I'll see what I can find out over the next day or two from Mr. Bay and then go from there.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
And Joe, would you mind, once you do that, sending an email to all of us, to the council and me relative to what you find out on that?
I certainly will. Yes, sir.
Okay. Larry, are you good with that? Councilmember Brost, I'm sorry. Okay, awesome. All right. Anyone else for anything under information? Okay, seeing none, moving into action items. The first is the accounting of city donated funds to the Pond Athletic Association. Joe, do you want to speak to that?
With your permission, Mayor, yes. Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, the Planning and Parks Committee at its January meeting undertook the assessment of cost associated with the city's payment to the Pond Athletic Association for certain services the city cannot provide in its park facilities. These services are generally ball fields and games for children to play during the season from roughly March to October. Over the last several years, the City of Wildwood has participated in this partnership with the Pond Athletic Association. In previous years, the amount of the payment for this partnership was $10,000 per year. Given COVID-19 and the impact it's had on revenues of the city, the budget for 2021 limited that payment for this partnership to $5,000. Key to releasing the payment to the Athletic Association is an assessment of how last year's funds were spent. And as in previous years, without exception, the Pond Athletic Association has used these funds to defer the cost for membership at the association to all participants in the training league. The Training League is the foundation of the Athletic Association in that that's where new children come to the Athletic Association for the first time. And out of the Training League, the association members hope that the children will stay on and play through elementary, middle, and high schools. So it is the building blocks for an successful association that will stay in place for a long time to come. The assessment of the finances that was provided by the Athletic Association to the city bore out again that the money was utilized for the Training League, which is a service that other city councils and this committee has improved. And so tonight, the Department of Planning is presenting to the City Council the assessment of last year's funds, along with a recommendation from the Planning and Park Committee members supporting the allocation of $5,000 to the Pond Athletic Association for fiscal year 2021. The memorandum or the letter goes in much greater detail from the committee, but I would note that the chair of the committee and I are available to answer any questions you might have in this regard. Thank you.
Okay, would someone like to make a motion to get this on the floor for discussion? Councilmember Flasher.
Yeah, I'll make that motion. As you guys know, I'm fairly active with the STL West. I'm actually the president of the STL West right now, which Pond is part of. And this is something that's really important, especially this year after the COVID situation. Ball fields are really struggling and they need these funds as much as possible to kind of keep us afloat, especially with the uncertainty heading into April here. So thanks.
Okay, is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Dodwell. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to proceed as indicated by the department. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. So that takes us to the next item, which is the reserve at Wildwood, and I'll do my best to sort of take my own advice in terms of moving the meeting along for our people who are here at City Hall. So as you may recall, recently this has been through planning and zoning, and it was presented to the council. And several weeks ago, maybe a month and a half ago, and at that point there was discussion relative to a couple of items. In principle, one was the effect of the development that's currently being proposed, the reserve at Wildwood, in terms of watershed issues on the adjoining creek. In other words, would it make it worse? And if so, what was being done relative to that issue to mitigate that? Number two was whether the developer had properly and completely identified all of the grand trees on the site per our code that requires that those trees be preserved or replaced with a very large tree to make up for it. And then subsequent to that, there's been discussion that I've had with some council members relative to whether there might be a grave site on this particular piece of property. So the upshot is, and the reason this is on the agenda, it needed to come back to council because it was postponed. We're actually a couple of weeks beyond the date of the postponement returned to the council. And my understanding, and you have a letter from Mr. Doster, who's the attorney for the developer, and I believe I saw him on the attendee list this evening. But in any event, the upshot is my understanding from the developer and their position is that they, as they indicated when they came to the council previously or initially, I think they had mentioned that the water runoff, the runoff from this particular development would actually be less after the development is done. Number one. Number two, they represented that they had fully and completely identified all of the grand trees and have subsequently reaffirmed that. And so we have, as you know, an engineer on our team at the moment, Dr. Hammer, relative to the watershed issues. So we needed to bring this back to the council, and I would propose, just to cut to the chase, if the developer, as they seem to be, is representing to us that the watershed issues are not going to be issues because they are reducing, in fact, the amount of flow from the property, number one, and number two, that they have fully and completely identified all the grand trees. I would suggest that we hold them to task on that. And I think that if the council is in agreement with that, then a motion would be that over the next 30 days, we allow our engineer, Dr. Hammer, to dissect and review their materials and speak with their engineer relative to the water runoff issue. And we can have our tree expert, if we want to do that, or anyone else, verify their information relative to the grand trees. And in relation to the grave site, we can also include that in the motion, that it be conclusively determined it exists or it doesn't. If it does exist, then what are they going to do about it? So that would be what I would suggest the council might consider doing, just to bring this to the forefront and we decide which way we're going to go. Councilmember Clark.
Yeah, I think that was very good summary of what we are looking at. There were a few other things that I would like for them to bring to the table. And number one, of course, we want them to work with our engineers and maybe even an arborist or someone to identify, measure, and to log in all of the grand trees throughout the area, but also to look at the tree preservation and the ecosystem that we have going on there and make sure that we don't just eliminate all of the rest of the trees that are there just because we want to build houses. And we also need a timeline that will tell us when the replacement trees would be put up, the ones if they are taking out any grand trees. Number two would be, we need to have an agreement with them and a plan, and to get measurable data predicting this proper stormwater management, and to see how they determined that their runoff is going to be a better situation than what we have now. The retention basins on the map, and I'm not a map expert, but when I look at the retention basins they have on the maps, it looks like a sinkhole. It doesn't look like a nice picnic area or something like that. And I would like to see what it is that's going to be when it's done. It's called common ground, but I don't think it's where it's going to be a place where you can have a baseball game or something. So, and of course, Dr. Hammer to verify that data. And number three, we need them to provide a revised landscape plan that will be more synergistic with the native flora of the area, and just to secure the aesthetics that we have in Wildwood and make it look like Wildwood and not bring in things from other areas or other countries. It might be beautiful, but maybe not fit in with Wildwood scenery. And maybe think about the suggestion that Mr. Gunther gave us. I think it was the last meeting that he talked. He had some really good points about placement and number of homes appropriate for that area. And after really looking at what he said, he really made sense on that. So maybe we could look at that a little closer. And number four, to assure that this empty crypt, whatever it is that is 20 feet from the property line, outside of the property line, is not indicating that there is a burial ground somewhere around there. And it probably doesn't mean that, but just to make sure that it isn't. And that, all that said, I would move that we postpone this issue for 60 days to give this the petitioner and our experts time to collect and analyze the data and provide a report accordingly that does those four things. One, preservation of the grand trees. Two, complete stormwater management, water retention, erosion mitigation, a natural ecosystem preservation plan, so to speak. And number three, a revised landscape plan. And number four, verify it's not the site of a former cemetery. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor that would postpone this for 60 days. That would allow and Councilmember Clark, please correct me if I get any of this wrong, that would allow our experts to basically examine the data from the developer relative to compliance with our tree preservation, which would include replacement. You mentioned that in your remarks, if they're taking any of the grand trees out. The water runoff issues as they represented that would be better rather than worse, as I noted in my remarks. Number three, the native flora and landscape plan. And number five, the crypt that would be the potential burial ground. Is that correct?
That is correct. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember McCune. Are you seconding Councilmember McCune? Okay.
Yes.
So we have a second from Councilmember McCune. So that is the motion on the floor. Councilmember Garitano.
Yep, I was just going to second it. I support it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Rambo.
Yes, I agree with Councilmember Clark. I am happy to leave the hydrology concerns to our captive expert. But I have concerns that are a bit different. Section 410 of our municipal code hasn't been updated since inception, and it's flawed itself. But this proposal seems to try to meet the letter, but not the spirit of some of those ordinances, the landscape plan, the plantings list, the tree preservation plan, et cetera. And I'm not going to go into, as a tree nerd, I owe it to you guys not to go into an hour's worth of discourse on the tree stuff. But I don't want to endlessly drag this out. And I don't want to play email or factual whack-a-mole with the developers experts who may have a vested interest in presenting a polite truth rather than what we've seen on the ground. But Wildwood has no arborist. I'm happy to fill that role, but I will go, check and find 36 trees that are 22 inches plus, and it doesn't, that doesn't quite meet the 24-inch standard, but they're still worthy of consideration. And there's lots of things like that I won't go into. But the other concern is aesthetic. Councilmember Clark touched on it a little bit. That 1 in 3 slope into a basin is something that I can't maneuver without a walking stick, and I'm walking in the woods several hours every day. And so there's that concern, the concerns of that we haven't addressed about homes that are 50 feet from thoroughfares, roofs that are clearly visible. I welcome the neighbors from Brightleaf. In fact, I have friends that live there, but we didn't do it exactly right. And this is our last opportunity to do a decent development in a high density area in town center. And I don't feel as though this is the proposal that gets that done. And so I'm looking for help in crafting an amendment that says we somehow capture these objections, and I'd be happy to help with that if it's appropriate, and submit them and get real answers to these questions directly from the developer, including on the tree preservation plan, because I don't think I'm not sure we can fund an arborist to go do it. We have a good guy, Andy Berg, who works for the arborist that does our emerald ash borer protection. He would be a candidate, but I don't know exactly how to craft this amendment.
So I think Councilmember Rambo, your comments are right on, and I couldn't agree, for what it's worth, I couldn't agree with them more. Maybe one way to handle this, we have a representative for the developer, Mr. Doster, with us as an attendee. And so we can move him over. I'm gonna take a stab at this, and if the council's agreeable to it, maybe this would be an approach. I think that the motion on the floor as it's presented includes the landscape plan, encompasses what you are actually discussing or have presented, which relates to, even though, as I understand it, Councilman Rambo, even though they may not be grand trees, are they, is the developer consistent with our Wildwood principles that we all embrace, doing their best to preserve and protect? And Councilmember Clark, what is remaining, even though they're not grand trees. Councilmember Clark also raised the issue of native flora versus foreign flora. So maybe one way to handle this, if the developer is agreeable and the council is agreeable to the response, and I'll just ask Mike Doster this question. So Mike, you've obviously heard the concerns that Councilmember Rambo has expressed, and I think they're encompassed by one of the elements that is in the motion, which is a landscape plan. So my question to you on behalf of the developer is this: rather than having an amendment to this, can we have an understanding that the developer, in the next 60 days, if this motion passes, in addition or as part of the 4 items that have been mentioned, and specifically the landscape plan, will look more particularly at all tree preservation, and particularly those trees that may not be quite a grand tree status legally, but as Councilmember Rambo expressed, fulfilling the spirit of our code on the matter, as well as home placement next to major thoroughfares. And I would add, and maybe this is where Councilmember Rambo was going, if those homes next to thoroughfares exist, placing natural native landscape, large tree, maybe barriers between those homes and the thoroughfares. So the question is, would the developer be willing to include that as part of its response to the council, assuming the council is agreeable, in the next by the time this comes back in 60 days?
Mayor, I did hear all of the comments, and I think I can represent that the developer is willing to consider everything that was commented upon in the next 60 days and be prepared to respond to council.
Okay, well, my question specifically, just make sure you hear it, is as part of one of these items, which would be the landscape plan, that the developer would look specifically at, even though trees are not necessarily in a technical sense encompassed by our Grand Tree Preservation Code, for example, if we've got, trees that are within an inch of that or within, a degree of that. In other words, as Councilor Rambo said, looking at the spirit, focusing on the spirit of our tree preservation code, would the developer be willing to take a look at what could be done relative to that vegetation? And then also, as the Councilor Rambo pointed out, in respect to those homes that you're proposing to be placed next to visible thoroughfares, what could be done with native flora and our wildwood natural vegetation to potentially place a barrier between, or somehow ameliorate that direct presence between, through the use of vegetation and trees, of those homes next to these thoroughfares. So that's the two-part question. Would the developer be willing to do that within the next 60 days?
We will look at that within the next 60 days.
Okay, Councilor Rambo, is that agreeable to you?
Provided we collect the things that I just said off the top of my head and all the objections and concerns that the other council members have in a timely manner and forward it to the developer, that's probably okay. But there are serious aesthetic concerns. And I just don't want another bright leaf, because there were folks that were really up in arms when the grading started in earnest there. And now for the rest of my life, I'm going to drive by there and look at rooftops that could have been hidden had we done a better job. And so this plan needs more work than I think this initiative is going to require of the developer, and that's my concern.
Okay, so what I would then suggest is that if this motion passes, that any council member who would like to elaborate on the items forward an email with those items to Steve Cross, who can then put those all together and forward them to the developer as one package. One thing I would just point out, my understanding is from when this was before planning and zoning, and this relates to what occurred at the Brightleaf development, the developer in this case has agreed to a staged or phased in development process. In other words, the entire site will not immediately be clear cut and all of a sudden you see homes. So it's going to be done in phases, and the idea would be to do exactly what you're talking about, which is to preserve as much as possible the visuals of this development as it goes in, and not basically scare our residents. So, Councilmember Rand.
Well, to be clear, I'm not trying to hide from our residents, and I don't want to impose death from 1,000 cuts I think no matter what, it's ultimately going to be rooftops for the remainder of my life. Clearly visible, certainly from the overpass of 100/109 along Manchester Road. The closest homes are 50 feet from the roadway. The closest homes from 109 are roughly 80 feet. And there's quite a bit of distance between the closest homes on the north side and Highway 100. But in fact, the elevations work out such that you're going to be parallel to the roof line on the highway, and it just goes up from there. So it's going to be a shock to people, no matter if they do the grading in phases or all at once.
I agree. Councilmember Edens.
Yes, just to reiterate from the previous meeting, I still have some of the same design concerns that I had before, including layout and a lost opportunity to connect with previously platted streets. And I just want to reiterate some of the objections our Ward 2 representative made on planning and zoning. So I guess my question is, because my additional concerns are not wrapped up in the main motion, is it still appropriate to send those in a list to the city administrator to be addressed?
I think without objection from the council, you could include those. I mean, I think
excellent.
This would be a time for the council to get the information and decide where it wants to go with it. So I think as long as they're not, I think that arguably could be included with respect to some of these things. So if there's no objection, I think that would be fine. Councilmember Edens.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
I think it's critical that we put some kind of wording, whether at this point or before the development actually begins construction, on monitoring the situation, because some of the same items that we're asking for from this development, we could also ask from Villages of Brightleaf, and some of those items, even though promised, did not occur. And I think ongoing monitoring to make sure that the developer is adhering to our request should be going on, not just from our department, but outside monitors as well.
I think that's an excellent point, and that's down the road, assuming the council wishes to move forward with the development. But I would just mention at this point that should the council decide to move forward relative to your point, Councilor McCutcheon, in my experience, one good way to make sure things get done is to require escrows. Okay, so we have, let's see, Councilmember, I'm sorry, Councilor Remy, I saw your hand earlier, but I don't see it now. Do you want to speak to this? Oh, I'm sorry.
I just was asking, there's a lot of questions. Is there any advantage to try to moving this forward? Why don't we just postpone it and get the answers to our questions?
Well, that's what we're going to do, but we're going to do it with expert review in our behalf that's going to cut to the chase, so to speak, with the developer, so that when it comes back to council, we're not left with the same set of questions of what they're representing to us the case, is what they're saying the case. If now we're going to know when it comes back, not only are the questions from the council answered, but either the watershed issue is or is not an issue, and the tree preservation matter is an issue or not, and it's no longer speculative. It is determined, presumably conclusively, if we believe in the expertise of our experts, that we're going to have second guesses.
All right, so we're not moving this forward. We're just getting answers to our questions.
That is correct. Joe Bennett, Director Bennett, I saw your hand raised. I still see it raised.
Yes, sir, but I'll defer to Dr. Rambo, given the time frame.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Rambo, I see your hand raised.
Yes, I'm sorry. It'll be real quickly. We haven't decided on an expert for the arborist piece of this, and we don't have an arborist on staff. Our Director of Public Works has cried out for one, but we don't have that expertise, and I'm afraid that their arborist, the developer's arborist will come back with answers, and I'll have to defend them in real time. I mean, I'll have to refute them in real time in a council meeting, which is not the appropriate forum. And so what are we going to do to, about the section 410 related questions?
That's a great question. And I'll just say, in my opinion, it's not as a council member, your job or any council member's job to be put in that position. Joe, my question would be, presumably there's money in your department's budget somewhere that you could retain an expert. If Councilor Rambo or anyone else wants to give you a suggestion, fair enough, as long as they don't have a conflict of interest and you think that their expertise is sound. I don't think any member of the council or I would object to you retaining them. And frankly, I'm not sure it's your job necessarily, Joe, to be out there, counting twigs and trees. So what is the possibility for you to retain an expert, as Councilor Rambo has suggested, within the confines of the budget that you currently have approved?
Very high. The intent, I believe, of the Department of Planning is to solicit some requests for qualifications very quickly from at least 2, if not 3 arborists, have them reviewed by the city administrator, and I can certainly provide them to City Council and you, Mr. Mayor, and then bring an expert on board to assist the city as we do in many other instances.
Okay. City Attorney Young, is this something that would need to go through that process?
Depends upon the cost of the professional service, but I think it unlikely that it would have to technically go through that for service, but it just depends on the cost of it.
Joe, what do you think the cost would be for this? I mean,
I am hoping it will be under $10,000, well under $10,000, thereby the city administrator can sign off.
Right. So if I mean, I don't have a problem with you getting bids, or however you want to do it. For my part, I mean, you presumably know who the experts are, and we've used people in the past if we've had good experience with them and their rates are fair. If you want to get a couple of bids and get some input from Councilor Rambo and city administrator and maybe others, as long as it can be, I guess what I'd say is as long as it can be done within the parameters of the 60-day window, and doesn't cost a lot. In other words, the process itself doesn't end up costing more in time and everything else than the actual expenditure. Just so we're practical about it, I think that we would probably be okay with it. But if any council member feels differently, feel free to speak up on that. So,
Mr. Mayor, it would be my hope that we'd have somebody at least identified for the benefit of the city council within a week or 10 days.
Okay. All right, so I don't see any other hands. One last question I have back to you, Mr. Doster, as the attorney for the developer. If we can move him back over. Oh, there he is. Sorry, Mike, I missed you there. So you've heard the discussion and where this goes. If this passes, I just want to be clear that in behalf of the developer, that it stands ready to prove up in essence what it has represented to the council and to address the other concerns that the council members will be providing and working with the arborist or whomever we ultimately get to do this. Is that a fair statement?
It is a fair statement. The only thing I would ask, Mayor, is that there are a number of comments offered by a number of people at different points in the discussion. I assume someone's going to accumulate all of those comments and provide them to us as soon as possible so that we can organize our approach and response.
Yes, so that's a great question. I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but if there's no objection, I think that, well, let me ask it as a question. Does any member of the council feel that a week from today is too short of a time for you to get your comments and issues to interim city administrator Steve Cross so he can assemble those for the developer? Does that seem sufficient for everyone? So hearing no objection, I think a week from today. Mike, is that agreeable with you and the developer?
That sounds agreeable, Mayor. That's a pretty fast track. I know there's some work to do to get those comments in, but that's agreeable.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so we have the motion on the floor. You've heard the developer and their agreement to it. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so Councilmember Remy has asked for the motion to be restated, so we'll just hold on that vote. Bear with me for a minute. So the motion is that it's postponed for 60 days so that the developer can provide its information to our experts and for their review and respond to their representations. In other words, are they accurate or not, relative to compliance with our tree preservation code, the watershed runoff, i.e. being less than what it was, what it is currently, revisiting its landscape plan specifically with respect to native flora as opposed to foreign flora, as well as the final item, which is the presence of a gravesite or a crypt, and if that does exist, what's going to be done relative to that. In addition, the developer agreed that any member of the council or I could submit questions within the next week to Steve Cross as to these or any other issues, and within the 60 days, it'll provide a response to those as well. Okay, good with that? Any member of the council not good? All right, so we're going to do a vote again. That's the motion, and it's been seconded. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 All right, any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so the motion carries. That takes us to our executive session. We are at 6:41, so before we do that, if there's no objection, I'd like to rearrange the agenda, go to our miscellaneous items, receipt and file, so that our city team doesn't need to wait for us to get through these. And I think that these will probably go rather quickly. So is there any objection to moving to the receipt and file and then going to the executive closed session? All right, seeing none. Joe, would you like to speak to PZ 14-20?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, this item is for receipt and filing. No action is required on the part of City Council. The Planning and Zoning Commission authorized an outdoor game court at a lot in Garden Valley Farm subdivision. And through the efforts of the property owner, the Planning and Zoning Commission, and city team members, we had a successful restoration plan developed for the property. If there are any questions on that item, I'd be glad to try to answer them at this time.
Any questions for Joe from any member of the council? I think this was approved unanimously at Planning and Zoning, wasn't it, Joe?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And the
All
next
right, good.
item, oh, sorry.
No, that's all right. Go ahead to the next item.
Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, the next item is just an update that was provided to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Some on City Council have also requested additional information on the service problems in the vicinity of the Joe's Way Tower. AT&T Mobile is gathering information for us, and Crown Castle addressed the concern of the nearby property owner. So again, this is an item for receipt and filing. The department would be glad to try to answer any questions at this time.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Are there any questions for Joe relative to the telecommunications item as authorized by PZ 4-98? All right, seeing none. So that takes us to an executive session. And Joe, we would like to have you join us for that, please, as well as City Attorney Young and Interim City Administrator Steve Cross, as well as Assistant City Administrator Julian Jacklin. We will need a motion to go into executive session. Would someone like to make the motion? Made by Councilmember Rambo, seconded by Councilmember Remy. This will need to be a roll call vote, as all items with respect to executive sessions must be. So, Ms. Eldridge, if you'd please call the roll.
Councilmember Garitano.
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher.
Yes.
Councilmember Jaxi.
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino.
Yes.
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell. Councilmember Dodwell. Councilmember Nyan.
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni.
Yes.
Councilmember Bros.
Yes.
Councilmember Clark.
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Remy,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
Councilmember McCune,
I abstain. I'm not present.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
Yes.
Okay, and council members, you may recall, our city administrator worked with Julian to develop a process for when we leave an open meeting and go into a closed meeting to make sure that we are in fact closed. And really the only item you need to do, and I would ask you to do it right now, is to click leave the meeting. And we will come back in public session once we're done. Thank you. And close your laptop.
3 or 4 evenings a week in these stupid meetings that maybe could be combined or shared or consolidated. What's that?
We're, whether it's better or anything, you're still.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the City Council for the City of Wildwood for Monday, February 8, 2021. Ms. Eldridge, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Boland,
Here.
Councilmember Garitano,
Here.
Councilmember Flasher,
Here.
Councilmember Jaxi, Councilmember Bertolino, Councilmember Dabo, Councilmember Nyan, Councilmember Bartolome. Okay, I'm not hearing you.
Here.
Councilmember Rose, Councilmember Clark, Councilmember Eden.
Here.
Councilmember Reddick,
Present.
Councilmember Farmer, Councilmember Galani,
Here.
Councilmember McCune,
Present.
Councilmember Rambo,
Here.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
Okay, the first thing I would like to do, actually, I should have done before we called roll here, my apology, is to adjourn the work session. I would entertain a motion to adjourn the work session. We'll just digress for a moment, made by Councilmember Flasher, seconded by Councilmember Galani. Non-debatable, all in favor of the motion to adjourn the work session of the City Council, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so the work session is adjourned. Now, moving back into the main meeting of the council. For those of you who are comfortably able, if you would please stand with me for saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
The flag.
to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. And again, welcome to our meeting. The next item on the list is the approval of minutes from the council's January 25th, 2021 work session and regular meeting. If you have any questions or comments, happy to take those now. Otherwise, I would ask for a motion to please approve the minutes.
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve made by Councilmember Clark, seconded by Councilmember Garetano. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, all in favor of the motion to approve the minutes, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. That takes us to public participation. Julian, do we have anyone who has raised their hand or indicated they wish to speak via Zoom? I don't think we have anyone in the council chambers this evening. So Julian, is there anyone who's indicated a desire to speak at this point?
No individuals have raised their hand or posted in the chat box.
I can't hear you, Julian. I'm sorry.
There's no individuals that have raised their hand or used the chat box tonight.
Okay, thank you. All right, so that means we will move into mayor announcements and appointments. There are no announcements, but we do have 4 reappointments. Each of these are to our Wildwood Celebration Commission. In order of ward, Ms. Libby Wilson from Ward 1, Ms. Vicki Helfrey from Ward 2, Jacqueline Tripp from Ward 5, and Corey Lawson from Ward 6. As I indicated in my appointment memo, they have all served admirably on this commission and desire to continue to serve. And if there's no objection to facilitate the business of the council this evening with the weather and everything, I would ask that we do these en masse. Again, if there's any objection, we can do them one by one. But if the council is agreeable, if someone wants to make a motion for approval of all, the approval of reappointing all 4, that would be excellent. Councilmember Garetano.
Yes, I'd be happy to make the motion for the approval of all of them.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve all 4 reappointments as presented. Is there a second to that motion? Seconded by Councilmember Bartoni. Any discussion? See no discussion. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. So we have no public hearing this evening. That takes us to our legislation, and we actually have no second reading. So all of these are going to be new readings, and we have 4 of them. The first is Bill 2595. It's before the council, and it concerns 4 wards, Wards 2, 3, 4, and 8. Is there a motion for the first reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Galani. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Dodwell. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2595.
Bill 2595, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the mayor to negotiate and execute a city contractor agreement with Kelp Contracting Incorporated for the FY 2021 concrete street slab and sidewalk replacement project, including traffic control and other incidental items as shown on the project specifications and drawings. First reading.
Thank you. Rick, do you have anything you'd like to mention further relative to this bill?
I have nothing further, Mayor, but of course I'm available for any questions from the City Council.
All right, thank you. Does any member of the council have any question for Rick or any comment on the bill? Councilor McCune?
Yes. I see when I downloaded this from the website, I don't see the specifications of the drawings. Were they missing on the PDF by chance, or were they just too large it didn't download?
Rick?
Councilmember, I did not attach the full set of plans or specifications for the project necessarily to the information provided. If you'd like that, I would certainly be able to do that between now and the second reading.
Yeah, I'd appreciate it since it's part of the bill. So thank you. I just want to make sure.
Okay, anyone else? All right, seeing no one, the bill will be on the agenda for the next meeting of the council. Moving next to Bill 2596, it's before the council and it concerns Ward 5. Is there a motion for the first reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember McCutcheon, seconded by Councilmember Bertolino. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2596.
Bill 2596, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the mayor to negotiate and execute a city contractor agreement with Foster's Concrete Construction, LLC, for the Evergreen Forest Curb Replacement Project, including traffic control and other incidental items as shown in the project specifications and drawings. First reading.
Okay, thank you. Rick, do you have anything you'd like to mention relative to Bill 2596?
Nothing in particular, Mr. Mayor. Again, I'm available for any questions from the City Council.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Rick? Councilmember Brost?
Yeah, I guess I know the answer to this, but just to clarify, Rick, on the two bills, there's nothing for Ward 1 and Ward 6. Is there a reason why they would not be included?
Well, the Bill 2596, of course, that was relative to just an individual subdivision with deficiencies in the curb. It's a unique situation, an older subdivision with asphalt curbs that are deteriorated, and we'd committed that we would work with the subdivision to replace the curbs in that subdivision. The first Bill 2595 is our concrete street replacement project that we do annually, and that project is primarily just the way the streets are, would most likely not be as likely to include Ward 1 and Ward 6, the more rural areas of our city. It's more the concrete streets and residential small lot subdivisions that we're working on. So it's probably skewed in that regard to those wards, not so much the rural wards. But the work for the concrete street replacement is by and large selected by Scott Hummel, our street superintendent. He puts a great deal of effort into looking at the street conditions throughout the city and essentially choosing worst first and coming up with his quantities of work for the year. So if you have any particular questions relative to that aspect of the project, I'm sure we could follow up with you. But that's the reason for it. Hopefully I helped address your question.
Well, I guess I would just like to just note that of the 900,000, none of it's in Ward 1 or 6. And so just, I'm making a point if you haven't figured it out. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Remy?
I was just pointing out Ward 3 is not represented.
You're on mute. Oh. Did you want to undo your microphone?
No.
Okay. All right, seeing no further comment, the bill will be on the agenda for the next meeting of the council. Moving to Bill 2597, this concerns all wards relating to our farmers market. Is there a motion for the first reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember McCutcheon, seconded by Councilmember Bartoni. All in favor for the motion to first read, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2597.
Bill 2597, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the mayor to negotiate and execute an agreement with Natalie McAvoy as the farmers market manager for the upcoming 2021 season. First reading.
Okay, thank you. Joe, is there anything you would like to say relative to this particular bill?
Just three quick items, Mayor, with your permission.
Sure, go ahead.
Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, there was a report from the Planning and Parks Committee at the last City Council meeting endorsing Ms. McAvoy as the market manager. The terms of the contract are identical to those approved by City Council in 2019 and 2020. And the Department of Planning and Parks is available for any comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Any questions for Joe or any comments relative to the bill? All right, seeing none. I'm sorry, Councilmember Garetano.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what was said about Ms. McAvoy in previous discussions. She's done a phenomenal job, and it's actually one of the events that we've been able to keep all through COVID. So thrilled that we can continue offering the farmers market to our residents and visitors.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? All right, seeing none, that will also, that bill 2597 will also be on the council's agenda for its next meeting. Moving next to bill 2598. This one, as you can see, comes from me. I just want to mention real quickly a couple of things about it. This has actually been something that I've discussed periodically with our city administrator and some people on admin public works, as well as our city attorney for some time. And just to sort of take it from the top, our charter, for whatever reason, granted it was done many years ago, sets a specific time that council meetings, not the work session, but council meetings cannot start before, and that time is 7 p.m. In fact, very few cities ever put in their charter a start time for anything, and the reason I'm assuming for that is because, as you're going to see in a second, it inhibits the flexibility of the council relative to when meetings start, particularly when you begin to deal with things like pandemics or whatever that you didn't anticipate, 30 years ago. So from my perspective, even if we are never in a position to start earlier than 7, it's just good to have the flexibility for the council to be able to decide when its meetings should start, rather than having something set in stone that simply hamstrings the council potentially, given the circumstances that we frankly can't fully anticipate at this point. The second part of this is that, and for example, tonight is a good example of it. If we had a smaller work session, as we have on occasion, we have weather, and that's been forecasted since the posting of the agenda. And we've got city team members that, because we couldn't start before 7 o'clock, are not going to be able to leave earlier. And out of deference to them and all that they do, if we have a situation where it makes sense in terms of meeting efficiency to give our city team members the ability to get home a little earlier, so much the better. The next thing, the next two remarks are actually tied to our residents, which is where this should be. First of all, relating to our residents, we have had instances, it doesn't occur at every meeting, obviously, but we have had cases. We had a few in the fall, actually, and I think we're going to have more going forward, where our residents have decided to attend City Hall for the work session. We've actually completed the meeting of the work session quite early, and they are left with sitting around for 30 to 40 minutes waiting for the clock to toll for 7 o'clock. Their time is valuable, and I think we ought to consider that. And again, it goes back to flexibility. The last thing I would say relative to residents, we've done our work session a little earlier than what we used to. I think we used to start them at 6:30. We moved that to 6. I have not ever heard a resident complaint about our meeting efficiency and having some of our meetings start earlier. I know some of our committee meetings and our Planning and Zoning Commission also do the same thing. I think they fully respect the fact that we're maximizing not only their time, the use of their time, but also those who volunteer for our city on committees and council and so forth. The last thing I would say is this relates to a 2022 vote, not 2021, which would mean it occurs in April of 2022 and therefore at no cost to the city. If we were to do it in November with other items, without other items on the ballot, it would result in a cost. And I don't think that that's something I would recommend to the council. And so this is a 2022 no cost item. So those are my reasons for it. I know I've discussed this with all of you, and I appreciate your support for it. So to get it on the floor, I would ask for a motion made by Councilmember Rambo, seconded by Councilmember Garetano. Okay, Councilmember Bartoni. I'm sorry, Councilmember Bertolino.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just a question, Mr. Mayor. Flexibility is what we're looking for, and efficiency in the meetings are what you're looking for. Why didn't we just eliminate the phrase from the charter that says nor scheduled prior to 7 p.m. local time? Why don't we just leave that blank, and then the agenda will tell the public when the starting time is?
That's a great question. Since this came in the wording from City Attorney Young, John, would you be so kind as to answer that question?
Yes, that was an option that was discussed, and there's certainly an option should the council desire to go that route, and you certainly can. The idea was just to simply establish a default starting time. That if the council did not act by ordinance, there was at least one that was established, but could always be changed by ordinance of the council.
Mr. Mayor, may I still have the floor?
Sure, go ahead.
I would just like to hear from the rest of the council is, again, if our goal here is flexibility and best use of our time, would the rest of the council be agreeable to changing the language in this resolution or this bill to simply say the removal of the phrase nor scheduled prior to 7 p.m. local time from the charter?
And so before we get a response to that, let me just say that when I first discussed this many months ago, as I've been toying with this and thinking about it and trying to consider all the possibilities and so forth, when I discussed this with City Attorney Young, that was actually my preference. In other words, just to leave it open so that the council can decide, and I want to stress, it's not the mayor, it's the council deciding when it wants to have its meetings. And so, John, for clarification, if the council were inclined to simply omit any start time, 7 p.m., 6:30, whatever, that would be the case. The council could then determine when it wants to have its meetings. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so Councilmember Bertolino, for my part, I would favor that wholeheartedly. I went for the 6:30 just to give, my thought was to give a little indication as to expectation on the part of our residents as to when these meetings occur. But I think our residents are certainly bright enough. If they're interested, they look at agendas, they can certainly read time and know time. So if the wish of the council is to move in the direction you've suggested, if you want to make that amendment and see where that goes, I would be perfectly okay with that. I'm sorry, point of order. Oh, I'm sorry. So we did have a motion to read, did we not? Oh, you know what? Actually, we can't amend until after the second reading. I think we did have a motion. We had a motion from Councilmember Rambo to read. Yeah,
I didn't read it.
I know you didn't read it. I'm saying we had a motion to read. We just didn't read it. So we had a motion to read.
Yeah, I have the motion to read. I just haven't read it.
Okay, so councilors, bear with me just 1 second. Go ahead and read the, my apology, read the bill.
Okay. Bill 2598, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, submitting to the qualified voters of the city at the general municipal election to be held in the city on April 5th, 2022, a proposed amendment to subsection A of section 3.8 of the charter of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, as it relates to regular meetings of the city council. First reading.
Okay, so the bill's been read, but to my apology, Councilmember Bertolino, to reiterate, I would favor, if the council would like to do that, to have an amendment to that effect. However, the bill can't be amended until its second reading, which would occur at the next council, which would give the council time to consider that, I guess.
Yep, understand. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Bartoni.
Thank you. So I kind of looked at this and I didn't have a problem with it at all, but the more I think about it, and not that I necessarily have problems, but I definitely have a lot of questions. And I think there's, Councilmember Bertolino brought up, something that needs to be considered. I myself also have never heard a complaint from a resident about the meetings, and that just kind of gives me more of a reason why we would not change it, because they're not complaining. And I think you can put it in big bold letters or big bold numbers with red and highlighted on the agenda, but people, I get a feeling residents are going to be a little bit confused. Like this meeting starts at 6:30, this one starts at 7, it might start at 6. And I'm just kind of also a little bit confused as to when would the council set the time? I mean, would it be like at today's meeting that we're going to set the start time for next 2 weeks from now? Because then we're like 2 weeks away. We don't even know what's going on. Or does the agenda come out on Thursday and then we decide what time? So I just don't, I think there's a lot that needs to be discussed here. From my understanding, this did not come out of committee, that this was discussed by admin and public works. I wasn't at that meeting, so I might have a little bit of this wrong, but from what I understand, they had a really good discussion, but there was some questions that they had for City Attorney Young that he was going to do some research and get some answers for. I think we're kind of, if this thing's a year away, 14 months away from looking at a vote, I feel like we're being rushed into this a little bit. And I'm going to make the motion that we send this back to Admin Public Works Committee, let them do their due diligence. That's why we have these committees. They're there to do the homework, to answer these questions, and then they can come back to us with a better, or at least to have questions answered for all of us in a better bill.
Okay. I guess I'm a little shocked that it's controversial, but I will say, Don, that the way we would determine the meeting time for the council is the way it's been done several times up to this point. And that is when the agenda items are assembled roughly Monday to Tuesday before each council meeting, and those are presented to me to put on the agenda. I look at what the timing is likely going to be of each of those items and where they're going to fit, not fit, and so forth. And as I have done previously, if there is a situation where a meeting would need to start later or earlier, I send an email to the council because it's the council's meeting, and I make a recommendation to the council as to the start time, and the council then lets me know how it would like to proceed. Once the agendas are published on Friday with the start time, they can't be changed by sunshine law. So we can't, on the day of a meeting, decide to change the time of a meeting. It would be done.
No, and at no time did I say the day of the meeting we would change the time. I didn't say that at all. I just said when would we change the meetings and when would we set the time? So that wasn't set at all.
Okay,
so
sorry.
I'm just thinking, and if it's, the council sets the time, but you're sending us an email. I mean, we've all had these meetings and you look at the agenda and you can be looking at it saying, oh man, we're going to be there all night tonight and we're done at 7:45. And there's other meetings where you look at it and you're just thinking, hey, this one's not going to be too bad. And next thing you know, you're here till 9:30. It's hard to look at that agenda and tell how long these meetings are going to be. I mean, you can give an educated guess, but by no means can we sit there and say, this one's going to be a 75-minute meeting or this one's going to be a 2-hour meeting. I mean, that's just nothing but a guess. And, I agree that the staff is probably overworked and definitely needs probably more time with their family and everything. But I don't know if that's necessarily a reason to change the start time. That might be a reason to have an end time, that put it on us to get our work done in a certain amount of time. So I'm leaving the motion out there. I think this needs to go back to committee, and I think that we need to get some questions answered on this.
Okay, thank you. And I would just mention your point relative to, I couldn't agree more relative to whether a meeting is going to last, determining whether it's going to last 30 minutes or 75 minutes. I do this every week with 2 different meetings, or I'm sorry, every other week with 2 different meetings for the council. I could not agree with you more. What I would say is that same determination is made whether the meeting starts at 7, 6, 5, or 9. So it's the same analysis regardless of when the time to start the meeting actually begins. So we have a motion to refer this to Admin Public Works. Is there a second to the motion to refer? Councilmember Edens, are you seconding the motion?
You want to put those on for me?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I'm not picking up your.
Yes, simply because we had a in-depth conversation in Admin and Public Works about not only changing the charter, but having a subsequent ordinance to piggyback off of that with, I think that would provide clarity to some of the questions that I heard today. And we also had a discussion too about the virtual attendance policy, which is on here. So Does it make sense to give us more flexibility than we have in the charter? Yes, but I just think that we were working towards a solution in admin, and I'd like to pick up where we left off. So not to trash what we have on the table, just to look at what we were planning on adding to it together as a whole perspective, right? So anytime we look at moving up a work session because we move up a council session, then we have to consider what happens when we have people stuck at work at 5, and how does that affect, a virtual policy? And do we even want to look at having work sessions starting, at potentially 5:30 or 5 at all? And so there has to be some kind of bumpers to make sure that we don't put council members all the time, driving and on Zoom. So I would just like to have that discussion as a whole. So again, not trashing the concept. I would just love to go back to the discussion we started in admin.
Okay, so we have a second. One thing I would just say, and I want to stress I'm saying this with all due respect. So this was first, I did do exactly what the motion made by Councilmember Bartoni and you have seconded did. I didn't raise this with the council as I am this evening. I did ask our Admin Public Works Committee to look at it. That started, I believe, in August, at the latest in September. It came up on the agenda, according to my count, 3 times. There was a deadline, which was January 26th, to have this on the 2021 ballot for our residents to consider, and that time has long since passed. And so that's why it's on the agenda this evening, is because I did in fact do what the maker of the motion and the second
Committee did one.
has, well, we don't actually know that, but we could decide that here. But the reason it's here this evening is because I did that. We've missed the deadline, and I just want to be sure that we don't miss another deadline to get this on the ballot if the council wants to do it. And
understandable.
My understanding is that from reading the minutes, and I could be wrong, I didn't attend those meetings, I haven't watched the live stream of them, but my understanding from the minutes that the discussion and what I would say the more, I wouldn't even use the word controversial, but debatable parts of this, it relates to the resolution that is a companion of this I put at the request of Councilor Remy on the agenda this evening, which relates to codifying the ability of the council to participate remotely. It wasn't whether to give flexibility to the council relative to its meeting start time. That's my understanding. But anyway, so we have a motion. Go ahead.
I would just add too, we never had, if I remember right, an attachment prepared before last time. So for whatever reason, perhaps, previous city administration, we just never had the debate at all. So unfortunately, the last time it was presented was last month. So.
Councilor Garitano.
I'll pass. Go ahead.
Councilor McCune.
Okay, sorry, I'm participating remotely with the audio. So it's on the motion, which I think that I want to support that to go back to committee. And quite frankly, I don't know why we're discussing it. So I have a couple of questions. I was on an admin in Public Works. It was never discussed 2 years ago. And you have reiterated, Mayor, that this is the council's meeting, the council's decision. I want to know who on this council has went to you requesting this change, because that's who would kind of dictate or move this forward. And listening to the committee meeting, it wasn't in approval with the committee members to move it to the agenda tonight. So I have to echo what Councilmember Bartoni said, is I feel it's rushed. So that's my first question. The other thing with the postponement that I want to bring up is that, moving things off to the city charter is a difficult thing, and it goes to the city voters. But really, what we sign up for when we run for election, this time has been set in stone, and it was set for a reason for people like myself that travel, or a mom that needs to cook dinner. This is a job that I do, that I report to the people that elect me in this position, just like everybody else, all the 15 other people. I know that I shouldn't set my travel schedule on Monday if I'm going to run as a council member. Moving this to make it more, flexibility and change it when we want to change it, I don't think that that's good for, one, that reason, if you're running and you know that you can set enough time to do what you're called to do in this job, because we are paid to do that. So based on that, I think that there's a problem. You know, in this one item, so I don't know where this derived from, and if the residents have complained, you have flexibility to move the work session around, and there's no regulation for that. So I would like to see maybe that the discussion is why don't we work with the schedule? If you want flexibility, you have concern with it, then change the work session times and not move for a charter amendment. It's not needed. It doesn't show anything. I've talked to many council members that are on this panel that it's very odd that we have these off times. So because it didn't come out of committee correctly, it got kind of rushed to the agenda. I would like to amend the push it back to admin, because I didn't see it when I was in session, and I've watched all the agenda items. So that's my first question, but I would say a motion to postpone indefinitely, because I don't think it's needed. And I could keep going on and on and on, but I think we're wasting time, and we're trying to save time on an initiative about a time that nobody has a problem with. So I'd like the first question answered of who brought this to you? Because that's a public record if somebody has a problem with it.
Okay, so Councilor McCune, you've raised a litany of issues. If you'll just hold on one moment, please. I want to look at your motion here. So your motion to postpone indefinitely would be in order. Before we get to that, I'm going to try to answer your questions, and please let me know if I forget any of them. I've had a number of conversations with various council members over the last several years about this and related items. Whether they were codified in an email, they could be, I'm not sure. You're welcome to make a sunshine law request for those. Relative to conversations that I've had with the various council members about it, I don't know that it's a good use of time for me to prove that I've done that by listing each and every one of them. I hope you'll just take my word for it. I'm happy to discuss those with you offline, but if you'd like to make a sunshine law request, you can. Relative to it being rushed, respectfully and with all due respect, I would submit that having submitted this already to the Admin Public Works Committee in August or September of last year is by no means rushed. And the last thing I would say relative to your idea, and if it would work, it would be a good one, to work with the work session agenda rather than to change the start time. The fact is we cannot do that. And the reason we can't do it, except to the extent of what you see this evening with moving the receipt and files to the work session, the reason is because it is also set by ordinance what items must be discussed at the council meeting. We cannot move bills. We cannot move appointments. We could move the Pledge of Allegiance, but I wouldn't recommend doing that. So unfortunately, your idea is not allowable.
Okay,
So
can you still hear me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I can't figure the phone thing out. So I appreciate what you just mentioned, but I guess, again, you've reiterated 3 times that it's the council decides this, and it's the council that wants to move this forward. But as far as a sunshine law request, I don't know why I need to do that when I'm sitting here trying to debate whether if I'm going to vote in favor or not. If the majority of the council is in favor of this, then I'd like to hear that. But I did in the committee wasn't ready to move forward, and we always go on the recommendation of what a committee does. But I watched the video. The committee wasn't ready, and Councilmember Edens even said that it wasn't ready. So that's where I'm kind of put aside by this. And if you talked, 2 years ago to other council members, they're not here and it doesn't affect them. So it's up to the council and how they want to conduct their meeting moving forward. This doesn't affect me, and I don't have any, it's not going to affect me because I'm not running again. But I think it's going to be important for people that would like to apply for this and would like to run and have a standard to say, yeah, I travel, I can't meet on Mondays at 7, or I need a cook, or I have my kids in piano lesson. And if you don't show up, you're penalized for it. You're there to do a job for the people, and can you commit to it just like you apply for a job? Can you show up at 8 to 5? Can you work these hours? Can you show up on these days? That's what we're called to do by the people that we represent. And I think that making this moving target, I think it's a bad thing. And as far as the residents sitting in council, if we have bad weather right now, we could dismiss this meeting as a vote because of pending weather. It can be adjourned. So I think if there was a question with staff and weather, we could end the meeting. So I don't know why we would have to make a charter amendment for that argument that you presented there. So again, I'm still saying let's move for a motion to postpone indefinitely until I can see that there's more council support that wants to change our meeting time.
Okay. So first of all, a motion to postpone indefinitely is tantamount to killing the item. It doesn't bring it back. Number two.
I understand that.
Number two.
Yes, I understand that.
Councilmember McCune, please. I have the floor right now. All right.
It's a delay. I'm sorry.
That's okay. So number two, relative to your point about we can adjourn the meeting and we're all here for a job, and if we don't want to do it or because of the weather, we can just simply adjourn it. I guess the problem I have with that is if we can do something as small as this to give us the flexibility to not have to adjourn the meeting and to still get our city team members home while completing the business of our residents, it really, with all due respect, makes no sense to me why we wouldn't do that. I can't imagine why this is even controversial, frankly. The last thing I would say relative to your point about we've had it in stone forever and people need to, they have to be able to be with their family, cook dinner, whatever. When it was set in stone 25 years ago, we didn't live stream our meetings for our residents to watch. We didn't allow our residents to participate or the council to participate remotely by Zoom. We didn't allow our residents to participate in public participation by Zoom. So I don't think that the context within which this was done 25 years ago stands the test of time today. And I've already spoken to the rushness of this. I don't think it's rushed. That's a pretty far-fetched point, but Councilor Garetano.
Yeah, my comment, well, we do have a motion on the floor.
Oh, I'm sorry, we do. Thank you. Is there a second?
Yeah, no,
motion?
is that, I do have a comment, but go ahead.
Yeah, hold on just one second, Councilor Garetano. We have a motion to postpone indefinitely, which effectively kills this. Is there a second to the motion to postpone indefinitely? Just one second. City Attorney Young.
Just to be clear, the motion to postpone indefinitely does not have priority over the motion to commit.
Well, I looked at that and I thought
I just looked in Robert's rules. It does not have priority. It only has priority over the main motion. The motion to commit is a subsidiary motion.
Oh, you're right. Thank you. Yep. So Councilor McCune, unfortunately, thank you, City Attorney Young. Under Robert's rules, the motion to refer trumps the motion to postpone. It was characterized as a motion to amend, but it's a motion to refer. And so your motion to postpone indefinitely would be out of order.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you for understanding that. Councilmember Garetano.
Yeah, I'll keep it quick. I think we have to just keep in mind that the change of time is the exception rather than the norm, if I understand correctly. So therefore, we have to be cognizant of that when we make our comments, because if it was the case where it would be changing continuously and regularly, I could see those concerns. But when it's the exception versus the norm, I do appreciate the flexibility and the ability that now we have things like Zoom and the ability to join meetings remotely. So that's really my comment. So I understand the motion then on the floor right now would be the one that Councilmember Bertolino made regarding the time, if I understand correctly. Is that the one?
No, his is the main motion that's on the floor. The motion, that motion, however, well, his is the main motion, Councilor Bertolino's, which is to simply remove the time to give the flexibility to the council. The motion on the floor is Councilor Bartoni's motion to refer back to admin public works.
Okay, that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Councilmember Galani.
I think I'm next.
I'm sorry. Councilor Rooney.
So just a quick question, and this is not about the merits of the motion or the merits of the bill. Procedurally, just so I understand, we're going to refer it back to admin public works, but in admin public works, we actually never moved it out of there. We actually are working on it in the committee itself. So how do we procedurally refer something back that's already in that location to begin with?
Well, it doesn't, it would just be the mirror image. I mean, it would be the same thing. It's a technical point, but the decision is what's being referred back, not necessarily the actual item itself. I mean, it is the item, but it's the decision on the item. So either way, it's certainly in parliamentary order to refer it if the council decides to do that. But thank you for the question. Council Member Galani.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I'm just a little confused as to, why this is so controversial as well. It's pretty cut and dry. I mean, I come from a belief system that having more options available is always better than not. And most times I would say that when you get into a situation where you're backed into a corner and you wish you had the ability to do something, but you can't, that's when you're like, man, we should have thought about this. And to the point here is this bill isn't, I don't look at it as a mandate to create chaos or some kind of revolving time slot that's all over the place. I don't think those are fair characterizations. I would say that all we're doing here is literally giving ourselves the option to change the meeting time if we needed to or wanted to. Yeah. We don't have to do that. We can still say that our meeting times are at 7 unless something comes up that we all agree as a council to change. But other than that, we would leave it at the same time indefinitely. But it gives us the ability in an unforeseen circumstance or a situation that comes up that we might not be able to see right now to make that adjustment and start half an hour, whatever we feel we need to. And even then, the entire council would have to decide that together. It's not the mayor that's going to decide that. It's not any individual. So once again, I'm kind of at a loss here as to why this is becoming such a controversial topic. And we're really spending an inordinate amount of time talking about something that really makes no sense, in my opinion. So just for the record, though, I support giving ourselves this right to make a change in the future. Thanks.
Councilor Bartoni.
Thank you. So I think why this is probably, or that I'm bringing this up for debate, is it did not come out of committee. And historically, we have items like this get debated in committee. Committee does their due diligence, and then the committee makes a recommendation to council. That's not happening this time. And I don't know if this is a precedent. I'm sure it's happened before. I don't remember it ever happening before, but it very well could have. The other part is it's saying that, the change in the time could be the exception. And somebody can explain this to me, because it says under section 2, letter A, the city council should meet regularly at least once each month at 6:30 p.m. So it wouldn't be the exception. It would be 50% of the time. So I'm just, I think it, I'm not saying that this is altogether bad. I think this needs to go back to committee and debate it. That's what we've done in the past, and I think we need to continue to do that.
So a couple of things, Councilor Bartoni, to your first point, we have had a number of things that are decided at a council level without committee action. In this case, as I've mentioned a couple of times, it was presented back several months ago to Admin PW. And my thought in putting it here this evening really had nothing more to do with anything other than let's make sure we don't miss another deadline, number one. But number two, from what I could tell, this aspect of the committee's discussion was not controversial. The questions related principally to the ability of the codification of the ability of council members to participate remotely. In terms of, I'm sorry, what was you had a second point there relative to, so it was whether we've done
well,
this.
the bill mentions that we would have at least one meeting a month at 6:30.
Right. Okay. Yep. Sorry. So that means if you read the language, so that means that we have to have at least that meeting, but with the change that's being proposed, the only thing that would change under Councilmember Bertolino's proposal is it would be the timing of those meetings would be up to the council to determine as the circumstances warrant. it wouldn't be that it has to, that one or two of those meetings has to occur exactly at any point in time, whether it's 6:30 or not. And I would also mention, just for reference, that the proposed draft that City Attorney Young has submitted to you, other than having the time 6:30 included, is the same thing. It doesn't require that half the meetings or a third of the meetings or all the meetings start at a certain time. It gives the council the flexibility that I feel it needs to make those decisions as it sees fit from time to time. So.
Well, I don't read it that way. I read it that it says that the city council shall meet regularly at least once each month at 6:30 p.m. That doesn't say city council has the discretion. It doesn't say city council has the option. It says city council shall.
Let's
That's just kind of part of what I'm getting at, is this needs to go back to committee to answer and to get all of these things ironed out and then brought back to council for us to vote on.
City Attorney Young, you want to respond to that?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Council member, you have to read the entirety of that sentence as well. And the remainder of the sentence says, or at such time and place as the council may prescribe by rule. So the 6:30 p.m. is a default for that one required meeting. And that one language, the one each month, is consistent with how the charter reads currently. And then the next sentence says the council may also hold additional regular meetings and work sessions at such time and place as the council may prescribe. So again, this provides that flexibility that's been discussed.
I understand that. And that's my point, is this says we have to have a meeting at 6:30 and the other meetings can be at a different time. That's why this needs to go back to committee and this stuff needs to be ironed out.
Councilmember Dodwell.
I'd like to call the question that this go back to committee, but I'd like to make the motion that it goes back to committee and the committee reports back within 30 days how they would like this to read so that we can finish this and get it on the ballot for 2022.
Okay, so that would be an amendment to the amendment to make a 30-day response. Is there a second to the amendment to the amendment? Made by Councilmember Flasher. Any discussion? Councilmember Remy?
I don't mean to beat a dead horse here, but it just seems so weird that we're arguing to send this back and then now we're saying 30 days when it actually is in the committee as we speak. So why are we doing all this when it's already in the committee? Why don't we just have Councilmember Garritano as the chair? He'll put it priority for our next meeting. We'll go all through these details and then we'll bring it back to the council.
I think the distinction is that the council would be specifically requesting a definitive response time.
I just want to make sure the council has a definitive response time. That's the reason.
But I have full confidence in Chair Garritano that he's given it its response time over the past 2 to 3 months. We had it on a few weeks ago or last week.
So, but Councilman Remy, the motion is in order. It's just you may not see it, but it is in order. So we've got to take it. No option. Okay, Councilmember Garritano.
Well, I'll do as the council, being the chair, I'll do whatever the council directs it to do, for the Admin Public Works Committee. I think I'm going to just express my thoughts around it. And Councilmember Galani mentioned some of this, but the charter right now has a hard-coded time in it. And I think that's the challenge, that there is no flexibility. And also, City Attorney Young said it's uncommon with cities to have a hard-coded time. So one suggestion or one way we can go about is that freeing up that section of the charter, as Councilmember Bertolino suggested, so we have the freedom. But the council can always, as an ordinance, pass whatever regulation as far as setting the meeting start time. So if we feel like we have to police ourselves because we are afraid that we could set a meeting too early, We could set an ordinance as a council that says meetings can't start earlier than, let's say, whatever, 6:30, 6 o'clock. But I think at least we should address the issue about the charter, because until we get that addressed, we're not going to be able to move forward with any of this.
Right.
And I think the council can address the ordinance piece of it, and then future councils will then never have to necessarily go through a lengthy process to change the time. They can vote as a council to determine that. So that's my take on it. I was going to just call the question as well. I think we've beaten this one up quite a bit. So just to get us moving. And as the mayor said, we want to get our staff home, especially, and everyone in the council home because of the road conditions.
So we only have one more person who wants to speak, apparently. Councilmember McCune, do you have anything new to add? You've had a couple times at this.
Yeah, it's my second. So I have a question. So I got the motion that it's going to go back to committee, which I'm in favor of at this point. My question is that somebody, I guess Councilmember Dodwell, if I heard it correctly, wanted a 30-day turnaround, and Councilmember Remy had commented it's in committee. What happens if we make that motion with a 30-day return? So it's a procedural question. What if it dies in committee? Then we bound this to come back for something that the committee didn't agree on?
It would be a report. It would be a report back from the committee to the council. Either it's doing it and here's the ordinance, or the ordinance, or it's not. But it would come back to the council one way or the other.
That's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to amend the amendment, and the amendment was to refer to admin PW, and the motion on the floor is to put a 30-day response time on it. Did we get a second to that? So we have a second. So the motion on the floor is the 30-day response time. We'll try a voice vote on this. All in favor of the 30-day response time to the amendment, if it passes, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Opposed?
Opposed.
We have
Opposed.
Remy,
Opposed.
Councilmember Edens, Councilmember Garitano, opposed. Any other? Councilmember McCutcheon, Councilmember Galani, opposed. Did I get everyone?
Councilmember McCune too.
Councilmember McCune, Councilmember Bartoni. I think we'll do a roll call vote. So we're going to do a roll call vote. This is only on the 30-day response time. A yes vote is to keep 30 days as the limit. A no vote is to leave it open-ended if it gets referred with no time limit on the response from admin PW if that amendment passes back to the council. So this is only on the 30-day proviso. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Nyan,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
No.
Councilmember Brooks,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
No.
Councilmember Remy,
No.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
No.
Councilmember McCune,
No.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
Abstain.
Councilmember Garitano,
No.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Jaxi,
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Yes.
So I didn't hear Councilmember Nyhan's vote. Okay.
Yes.
So I believe the 30-day proviso passes. Is that correct, Councilmember or City Clerk Eldridge? Okay. So now we're back to the amendment, which is to refer Councilmember Bertolino's motion to Admin Public Works. If this passes, it'll be referred to Admin Public Works to consider and respond within 30 days. If it doesn't, we'll then vote on Councilmember Bertolino's main motion as presented. So roll call vote, a yes vote is to refer, a no vote is to not refer. And to vote on the I'm sorry, Councilmember Galani.
So I just want to make clear on what we're doing here. So we already passed the 30-day thing if it does go back to committee. And what we're voting on now is to send Councilman Bertolino's suggestion back to Public Works. And if that doesn't pass, then we're voting on just amending your initial bill to Councilman Bertolino's.
That is correct.
Okay.
Okay, Mayor Bowen, I think it was my motion to refer
Oh, I'm sorry,
to.
my
admin.
apology. So
No problem.
it's the fourth time I've confused you and Councilmember Bertolino this evening. So the vote now is on.
Sorry, Don.
The vote now is on Councilmember Bartoni's motion to refer, which has been amended for a response within 30 days to Admin Public Works. If this passes, it gets referred. If it doesn't, we'll come back to Councilmember Bertolino's main, what we call the main motion, which is to present for approval of the voters the ability to give the council flexibility, with a little bit different than what I'm proposing, but nonetheless, it gets us from point A to point B. So this is on the motion to refer. If a yes vote is to refer, if it doesn't pass, we'll come back to the main motion as proposed by Councilmember Bertolino. Please call the roll for referral.
Councilmember Nyan,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Yes.
Councilmember Bros,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
No.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Remy,
No.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
No.
Councilmember McCune,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
No.
Councilmember Garitano,
No.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Jaxi,
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell.
Yes.
Is that yes?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so the motion to refer passes. This will be at Admin PW with the report back in 30 days. Thank you for your consideration of it. Moving next to Bill 2598. It is before the council for first reading and it concerns, I'm sorry. That was Bill 2590. My apology. We go to resolutions. So we have two 2021-3 and 2021-4 that both relate to largely the same thing. So I thought if there's no objection to expedite the business of the council, we would consider these together. And I understand these were on the agenda for the council at its last meeting. As you know, I was not here for that meeting. And my understanding is that they were postponed and that's why they're back to this meeting, and that's why they're back at this meeting. I've since talked to our city administrator and about the background of these two resolutions, and that includes the results of the MoDOT traffic study and so forth, which, as Councilmember Bartoni aptly pointed out, is something that one of our committees, Admin Public Works, might be in the midst of wanting to consider, similar to the last item we just discussed. The problem with that, or potential problem with that, is the applications that are needed to be applied for East-West Gateway. So one idea that I thought about, and I did discuss this with both Chair Garitano as well as our city, interim city administrator, Steve Cross, was the council could consider these two resolutions together, refer them to Admin Public Works for consideration in relation to, among other things, the effect of the traffic study and the determination of whether there could be other funds such as MoDOT and so forth in the mix. And at the same time, in that motion, the council could direct our city team, Rick in particular, to proceed with the application to East-West Gateway. In the event that the Admin PW committee recommends to the council and the council ultimately approves not proceeding with the request for those funds, we could always withdraw those applications without penalty. So that's just one option that I thought might close all the loops and give the council and the city the flexibility it needs relative to moving forward, while at the same time not making commitments that we may not want, and also fully assessing the impact of the MoDOT traffic study and exhausting the possibility for other funding sources. So I don't know what you think about that, but that's just an option. Councilmember Bertolino.
Thank you. I'd like to ask the other members of the Admin Public Works, it's my recollection that we beat these things to death the last meeting and came up with some with recommendations. I'm a little surprised that that we want to put them back in the hands of the Admin Public Works. But can I hear from the other committee members? Do your recollections the same as mine?
Councilor Garitano.
Mayor, if it's okay, yes, I'll speak to it. So the majority of discussion when this was at Admin and Public Works was around the roundabout at Old Staten Ridge. So at that time, we did not have all the details regarding the Route 100 items that you see in front of you tonight. At the last council meeting, the mayor did mention we had this, but there was discussion that Rick was going to follow up with MoDOT potentially with there was being that cost sharing agreement. And so it was postponed. However, at least my perspective is that if it was not going to change, which the language has not changed in the resolution because Rick came back saying that that's not specifically the case, that at least in my perception is we would move forward then with what we had. And of course we have to do that because the deadline to East-West Gateway is in 3 days.
So Joe, are you thinking like Councilmember Bertolino is that it would not be a good idea to refer back, or do you think it should be referred back with the MoDOT traffic study in tow? Or
well, I think most definitely we have to move forward with the application. We don't want to miss that opportunity in 3 days. But as far as Admin Public Works, I mean, I am interested in hearing what MoDOT's traffic study is, and I do think having MoDOT come to Public Works to discuss their findings would be a good place to do that. And that way, you know, unless there's something drastic that comes out of it, that MoDOT tells us that something that means we don't need these changes, I would expect we're still probably going to continue forward with these applications. Does that help, Councilmember Bertolino, or did I not answer your question?
If I may, Mr. Mayor.
Sure.
Yes and no, Joe. I mean, I think we do have the study from MoDOT, and that's the reason that we have before us these recommendations for the J turns and the crossings and the left turn lanes and so on.
So now I understand where. Well, Mr. Piercy was planning to come tonight, or at least we had hoped he would be here tonight. However, that's not the case. And so in discussion with the mayor, it was decided to have Mr. Piercy come to the Admin Public Works meeting and provide that update. All we know is we've seen the memo from Rick Brown that there are some potential measures that MoDOT can take, such as line striping, signage, lights, but we need to get the details from MoDOT, and Mr. Piercy coming to our Admin Public Works will be able to share that hopefully.
Councilmember Dodwell.
Folks, I think we would be remiss in not approving these two resolutions this evening. If we have the ability to back out of them, and then East-West Gateway can appropriate the funds to something else, but having worked with MoDOT in the past, I don't know that we have any guarantees that they will be footing the bill for anything as yet. And so I think it would be irresponsible of us as council members to not move forward with these resolutions and continue doing our due diligence with other funding sources. And if we get those funding sources, great. Then we can allow East-West Gateway to appropriate these funds to another applicant on their list. They have gone through this process before where other cities have said, no, after all, we don't need the funds, and given it back to them. Doesn't happen very often, but I just don't want to miss funding sources whenever we have them available to us.
So are you making a motion to approve the amendments?
I'm making a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, so I'm sorry, the resolution. So we have
the resolutions.
Yeah, so we have a motion to approve that, and you're speaking, Councilor Dodwell, in terms of both 2021-3 and 2021-4.
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Bertolino. So the discussion now is on the two resolutions. Let's please have them read first. Ms. Eldridge, please read Resolution 2021-3 and 2021-4.
Resolution 2021-3, a resolution of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing submission of an application to the East-West Gateway Council for Governments and the Missouri Department of Transportation for federal funding of a capital improvement project to design and construct restricted crossing U-turn intersections, J-turns, at State Route 100 with Pond Road and State Route T, St. Albans Road under the Surface Transportation Program Sub-allocated STP-S funding program for the St. Louis region. Resolution 2021-4, a resolution of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing submission of an application to the East-West Gateway Council of Governments and the Missouri Department of Transportation for federal funding of a capital improvement project to design and construct left turn lanes at the intersections of State Route 100 with Bunis Lane, Woodland Meadows Drive, Hinkin Road, and Hawks Rest Road / Windy Hollow Lane under the Surface Transportation Program Sub-allocated STP-S funding program for the St. Louis region.
Okay, thank you. Rick, do you have anything further you'd like to mention relative to the resolutions?
No, Mayor, I do not, but I'm certainly available for any questions from the council.
Okay. Councilmember Bartoni.
Thanks. I might have just like misheard you or something earlier, Mayor Boland, but I didn't recommend or suggest that we send these two items back to committee. So
I didn't.
If I said that, I misspoke, but I didn't make that suggestion.
No, that's not what I said. And my apology if I didn't say it more succinctly. What I was saying is I was borrowing your concept that you just mentioned a few minutes ago in relation to another bill and advocating for exactly the same thing. I didn't mean that you had said that. Councilmember Edens.
Yes, this is for Mr. Brown. So I appreciate that you approached Ryan and MoDOT with potential future funding and splitting the local match. Excuse me, according to the memo that was provided, this is like over $500,000 in savings if MoDOT would kick money in. I'm just a little bit confused as to whether that's over another year out, why we wouldn't just wait and do this application next year. Am I missing something?
Rick?
Would that MoDOT money come in?
Actually,
at the same time?
Our city administrator will respond to that. Steve Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Edens, and really the entire council, at the last council meeting, when these two resolutions came up and they were postponed, the directive from the council was for Rick and I to have a conversation because I had in particular had just learned that afternoon walking into the council that MoDOT had approached us and started talking about this 50% car share of our 20%. It was intriguing, but we did not have enough information when we came to council 2 weeks ago. So Rick and I were asked to pursue that and find out. Rick and I did in fact have a conversation with Ryan Piercy from MoDOT about that 50% cost share. The chances of that occurring based on our conversation with Mr. Piercy is I would give it at about a 15% percentage that it would come through. He was very vague that is not in their budget. It would go so far out. In fact, it would push this project out a year. But again, the likelihood, according to what he told Rick and I, is so slim to bypass and push these resolutions off a year, and then find out from MoDOT what appears to us, what he said, and he was pretty specific, saying the chances of this are very, very slim. I don't see that. This is my opinion, and Mr. Brown can certainly weigh in with his opinion. But I was part of that conversation, and Mr. Piercy was not at all gave it any kind of a warm fuzzy that this would actually happen. It was something that he threw out. So I just wanted to share my take on that conversation with Mr. Piercy.
I appreciate that. And just follow-up question, there was no indication that it would be added to any time in the future soon to MoDOT's work program for them to do themselves, correct?
That is correct, Councilmember.
Okay.
Councilmember Clark.
Yes, well, I fully support this, going ahead with this, but we need to continue to work on it because this does not address everything that's a problem on Highway 100. As I've mentioned on other occasions, I believe we need to address the entire problem and not only the parts that were identified years ago as a safety issue at Pond Road and at Highway T. If we do this, we need to continue work on trying to close all the crossovers at Wild Horse Creek and Mueller Roads and have all of those turns be right turns to make left turns out of the cross streets. But I would also ask that Mr. Brown, please send us the completed road safety audit presentation when MoDOT has that finished so we can see what they came up with.
Okay, Councilmember Garitano.
Yeah, just quick. I think it's good to note too that East-West Gateway is not any guarantee. We've had some good success, but we've also had a couple of projects that have not made it through. So again, we're counting on and hoping that East-West Gateway will come through for us on Route 100. And to Councilmember Clark's point, there is a more holistic system-wide issue that needs to still be addressed. And I do think that the way we're going about it, at least, is better than nothing. Anything helps. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. All right, seeing no further discussion, I'm sorry that, I called on Joe. Seeing no further discussion, the motion on the floor is to approve resolution 2021-3 and 2021-4. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, we have two additional items. I'm sorry, three. First one is resolution 2021-5. Is there a motion to adopt resolution 2021-5? We have a Councilmember Galani. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Garitano. Ms. Eldridge, please read the resolution.
Resolution 2021-5, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, providing for the refund and waiver of certain liquor license fees for 2020 and 2021 license years.
Okay, thank you. And this is being proposed by Councilmember Galani, along with Councilmember Edens. Councilmember Galani, would you like to speak to it?
Sure, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, so this is really something that I would hope we can all get behind, and it's been a very troubling past year for all businesses really, but especially the bars and restaurants across the St. Louis area and the country, and especially here in Wildwood, where we don't have a thriving office business environment that feeds lunch crowds and whatnot. But with all these folks having been forced to close down and not allowed to operate due to the pandemic, I don't think it's right that they should have to pay their liquor licensing fees to the city when they weren't allowed to operate for a good part of that time, or at least not on a normal level. So I think our sister municipalities, Eureka and Baldwin, have already taken this step and passed these similar resolutions to provide assistance. And once again, we're not talking about a massive amount of money. I believe it's $19,000 over the course of both years, 2020 and 2021. I did speak to Interim City Administrator Cross, and he said that if we get this resolution passed before the end of February, which is right now, that they would be able to reverse the revenue from those fees booked in 2020 and reflect that adjustment in the 2020 year-end financials, if I understood correctly. And so that wouldn't have to all come out this year. As far as how that would be covered or paid for, there's a couple different ways we could do it. One option would be to just use reserve funds to accommodate that $9,500 in each year without affecting either budgets at all. There's another option too. One of the things that I saw on here for the 2021 budget, at least, we've got $93,000 allocated for a special project, Celebrate Wildwood. That's a $8,000 increase from what we spent last year, I believe, or what we had in the final budget for 2020. So we could easily take $9,500 out of that $93,000 from Celebrate Wildwood and have little to no impact on the budget and be able to offer a significant token gesture more than anything else to let our city businesses and restaurants and bars that Julian works so hard to assist and work with, and let them know that we are thinking about them. And while it's a small gesture that we could do, it's something that we can have the power to do to show them that we care and we're here to help them. And a lot of these folks are on the ropes and fighting to keep their heads above water and keep their doors open. And the residents in our city need these restaurants and bars to be able to go to and not have to go to other cities. So like I said, I think it's a no-brainer in my opinion, but that's what I have.
So Councilmember Galani, do you have other ideas or specifics relative to where the money would come from? And so you're proposing part of it from WCC, the celebration event. Anything else?
Well, I think the WCC, I just looked at that because that's something that is what I would consider an elective special project. I mean, if we didn't have the Celebrate Wildwood even for 1 year, if it was order to help our businesses, I think that would be a much more noble cause. But in this case, we don't have to cancel it or take all the money out of it. We're talking about $9,500 against $93,000 that's in the budget. So I would advocate that it would probably have a minimal impact to that event or that project. But it would be much better spent in, putting that money back in the pockets of our business owners.
Interim City Administrator Steve Cross wanted to mention something. Mr. Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to clarify the accounting of the estimated $19,000 amount to accomplish this. Half of it, $9,500, would be applied to 2020. That's not any cash out. That would be a refund of fees that were already paid to the city. And we'll begin the audit of the city at the beginning of April of this year. But because you have a couple months beyond the end of the year in which to make certain adjusting journal entries. And so we would just simply journal entry out those fees. So there would be no cash impact or anything. That would just simply be an adjustment to what occurred already in 2020. It'll be reflected in the audited financials. So the only impact, if you will, would be how to handle the $9,500 that needs to be reflected in the 2021 actuals compared to the 2021 budget.
Okay.
That's where.
So Steve, for the council's benefit, what's the bottom line? If they want to do this, what do you recommend they do?
Well, again, if this were to be approved, 2020's year-end financials would be adjusted by $9,500. That would simply just be an adjusting journal entry, which would reduce the reserves by that amount. So the reserves would go down a little bit at the end of the day when it shakes out. The real issue that the council needs to address is where the $9,500 would come from for 2021, be it Mr. Galani's suggestion of the Wildwood celebration, out of reserves, out of some other line item, an operating expense, not a capital expense, but a line item expenses. It would have to come out of something and be adjusted so that we maintained a balanced budget as we currently have.
Okay. Councilmember Galani, since it's your motion, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify also, and speaking to Interim City Administrator Cross about this, he did say that he will be doing his mid-year review, right? Come spring or summer on the budget to see if where any adjustments might be able to be allocated or made based on our expenditures for the year against the normal budget.
Councilmember Galani, we do each year, there is a mid-year budget review. That would not be in the spring. That would be more late summer after.
But
mid-year.
we could pinpoint areas where there could be adjustments made that could accommodate that $9,500 at that time, or stick to the Wildwood celebration or reserves for that matter. But there's several options that we can approach and how to deal with this.
Right now, it's too early in the year to know whether we're up or down on concerning any line item compared to budget. But about mid-year, then we might have identified some trends where there might be some accounts that you might be able to draw from. It's too early to tell right now. That's the purpose of the mid-year budget review, and then any budget adjustments we make at that time. But again, that's 4 months away or so.
Councilmember McCune.
I have a couple questions and I don't know who can answer them for me. I like the idea and I think it's important, but what are we doing for the other businesses that don't sell alcohol or liquor? They also suffered. So are we going to waive business licenses next? Like, where do we draw the line on refunds to include all businesses and not just those of restaurants that sold alcohol? So I'm a little concerned that we're starting something that might cause greater concern with other businesses. Also, how many businesses are we talking to waive the liquor license? Just the amount of businesses is my question. And then my last question is that, like I said, I support businesses, but I just have to question, I think some of the businesses qualified for tax incentives or refunds when they applied for loss or things that they suffered through this. They were allowed or tax credits. So I just want to make sure that we're looking at all businesses and not just the liquor license businesses. So any answers, I'd really like to hear those.
City Administrator Cross, can you respond to her questions, please?
I can respond to one of the questions. You asked how many businesses would this impact, and there are 14 establishments within the city of Wildwood that would be included in this resolution.
So is it applicable only to those that sell liquor or to other businesses? That's her question, I think.
It is only applicable to those that sell liquor.
Okay.
And are we still making people pay for their business licenses to the city of Wildwood currently yearly?
Yes, we are, until such time as the council approves to do something otherwise.
Okay, I just have a reservation on just 14 businesses that we're trying to lend a hand to, and what do we do with the rest of the businesses when they ask for a favor? So it's just a slippery slope I want everybody to think about. So thank you.
Councilmember Bartoni.
Thank you. I mean, I like this idea. This is a good spirit and it's a good gesture that the council is making. My question would be, and I don't know if this is for Mr. Cross or for someone else, but does this include Schnucks and Dierbergs? Because restaurants and bars had their worst year ever, and Schnucks and Dierbergs saw record liquor sales last year. So do they just kind of fall into the same group and they're going to get the benefit of this?
Councilmember Bartoni, no, that does not include them. I will tell you very quickly for the council, Wildwood Pub and Grill, Hidden Valley Golf, Milk and Honey, Parkside, Benedetto's, Larry's Tavern, El Maguey, Craft, Big Chief Roadhouse, Stovall's Grove, Casey's Bar, Vallarta Mexican Restaurant, Letty Lou's Cafe, Thai Bistro.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Councilmember Garitano.
Yeah, I think a couple of points. The restaurants, these are the ones that actually have been impacted the most because of the capacity restrictions. And then for a good part of April, they were the ones that were forced to shut. A lot of the others continued to operate, and even a few actually were very busy because many people were doing lots of home improvements. So that actually the pandemic created a situation where there was some business. But just regarding the concern for the 2020 budget, interim city administrator Steve Cross, we did get that CARES money last year that also increased our reserve by about almost 1.5 million, if I recall. And then as well, the report in November had told us that we were actually seeing less expenditures. So that might be reflected when you do the financial statements in April, right?
Councilmember Garitano, the CARES money that we received actually totaled $2.4 million. That was included in the 2020 and will be reflected in the ending reserve balance at the end of 2020.
But for clarification, that was not a windfall to the city. That actually took care of expenses that we had, or the lost income that we had as a result of sales tax, fewer fines, penalties, and a number of other things. Is that not correct?
The CARES money that we received was not meant to shore up any loss in revenue from sales tax or others. It was meant to defray expenses for police services and other public safety expenditures.
Correct, but I guess at the end of the day, financial statements at the bottom line, regardless of whether it's meant to pay for one thing or offset another. Had we not had those monies come into the city, we would have likely had to have gone into reserves to make up the difference of those funds that came into the city.
Prior to, that is correct, Mr. Mayor. Prior to applying for those funds and ultimately receiving those funds, when I came back in September, we were looking at a deficit of about $1.5 million for year-end 2020 until we were able to apply for and ultimately receive those funds,
right,
which then gave us a positive reserve of about that same amount.
Right.
So
I'm not
in
speaking
the black.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. I'm not speaking for or against the motion. I just want to, for clarification, make sure the council and our residents understand
Well,
that.
If I could, looking at the memo when we got, it said the general fund balance before CARES money was supposed to decrease by 1.089, about $1.1 million. But then after we got 2.4 in CARES money, our general fund balance is now projected to increase by 1.5 million. So that's what I'm looking at here. So the CARES fund actually put us ahead for 2020. So I figured that with the looking for how to pay for it, the 9,000 in uncollected fees would more than cover that with that projected increase that we got. And that's a memo from November 23rd.
Just one second. Do you want to respond to that?
Well, Councilmember Garitano is correct in that there was a deficit projected. We received the CARES fund, which then did give us a positive fund balance at the end of the year. And as we have talked about here, the refund of the 2020 license fees would be reflected ultimately when we do the audit. It'll reduce it by $9,500. That increased fund balance, or that positive fund balance, of course, will carry forward to the beginning of 2021. But again, each year's budget stands by itself, and we have a balanced budget. So regardless of what the reserve balance was at the beginning of the year of 2021, or ultimately at the end of the year, the budget itself is a discrete point in time. We have a balanced budget. So if we are to not collect that $9,500 as a revenue source, which is in the budget, the balanced budget, it needs to come from some other line item, or it goes into the reserve balance.
Completely. I'm only talking about 2020. 2021, I think we'll address when we do the mid-year budget review.
Councilmember Remy, you have a point of order question?
Yeah, point of orders. Can I call the question on this?
What is your point of order?
Can I call the question?
You can call the question. We have a motion to call the question. Is there a second to call the question? Seconded by Councilmember Dodwell. So this is a 2/3 vote. We'll do a voice vote, and if I see it's definitely not a 2/3 or close, we'll do a roll call. So all in favor of calling the question, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Oppose.
Oppose.
We have 2 opposed. Councilmember Edens, who is also opposed? Councilmember Rambo. Okay, so the motion to vote immediately passes. The motion on the floor is to approve resolution 2021-6. 5 as presented. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Yes.
Councilmember Bros,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
No.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Remy,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
Councilmember McCune,
No, I think we need all businesses included. Thank you.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
No.
Councilmember Garitano,
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Jaxi,
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Nyan,
Yes.
Okay, so the resolution passes. Councilors, we have 2 resolutions left. One of those is proposed by me. It's resolution 2021-7. We're now at about 9 o'clock. In the interest of what I mentioned earlier relative to our city team here, I'm going to withdraw that. I'll decide whether to put it back on the next agenda if there's no objection to me withdrawing it. That is, since it is within the purview of the council once it's on the agenda. But if there's no objection, I'm going to withdraw that. I'll decide, depending on what happens at Admin PW with respect to that, as to whether to put it back on. So is there any objection to withdrawal of resolution 2021-7? Okay, seeing no objection, that leaves us with 2021-6. I would submit that that is not something that's necessarily urgent for this evening and that we can move that to the next meeting agenda. Is there any objection to moving it to the next meeting agenda? Okay, seeing no objection, that's what we'll do. If no one has anything under miscellaneous, that takes us to adjournment. I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Made by Councilmember Farmer, seconded by Councilmember Galani. It's non-debatable. All in favor of the motion to adjourn, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so we are adjourned. Thank you and have a great rest of the week.
Everybody drive safe.